about your own workplace for a second. The people you interact with daily. Look around the office or, well, scroll through the faces on your next Zoom call.
Yeah, it's a pretty sobering exercise when you actually do it.
It really is. Because statistically speaking, out of every 8 people you see, only one of them actually feels a meaningful connection to their work. Just one.
Just one. Which means the other 7 are essentially, sleepwalking.
Exactly. Sleepwalking. They are doing the bare minimum to get by, quietly updating their resumes, or just waiting for the clock to hit 5.
Right. And usually when we talk about a global crisis, you expect, like, sirens and breaking news alerts. But this is...
It's silent crisis.
Exactly. The silent crisis of modern business. We have this massive global workforce of the disengaged at the exact moment. Organizations are just utterly desperate for fresh, innovative ideas.
The sheer scale of that squandered human potential is staggering. We are leaving massive amounts of creativity on the table, basically just because of how we structure our working environments.
We really are.
Which is exactly why we're pulling apart some brilliant research today by Dr. Jonathan Westover. He published this article called Participative Leadership and Employee Creativity. And it basically asks one core question, which is, how do we go from a workforce of zombies to an actual powerhouse of innovation?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is. So, okay, let's unpack this. Because, participative leadership sounds a bit like, one of those corporate buzzwords you'd find on a motivational poster in a break room.
Oh, it definitely gets misused constantly. Yeah. But at its core, the research positions participative leadership as the structural antidote to those old command and control models.
Right.
Because the traditional rigid hierarchy where the boss thinks and the worker does, it's completely failing in modern complex environments. The solution is structurally sharing power. But as we'll discover, while handing over power is the necessary first step, there's a hidden, highly sensitive psychological mechanism that dictates whether that shared power actually creates innovation or just, total chaos.
Well, before we get to that psychological trapdoor, let's define what sharing power actually looks like on a random Tuesday afternoon. Because if I ask a room full of managers if they are participative, every single one will raise their hand and say, oh, I have an open door policy.
Yeah, and having an open door is totally passive. True participative leadership is an active operating system. And the research breaks it down into 4 distinct pillars. The first 2 are decision involvement and information sharing.
Okay, decision involvement and information sharing.
Right, meaning you aren't just asking employees, like, where to order Friday lunch. You are bringing them into consequential choices, and you are opening the books. Providing the actual organizational data and the rationales behind your strategic dilemmas so they can make actual informed contributions.
Making sure people actually have the context to give a good answer rather than just asking them to, well, guess what leadership wants?
Exactly. You can't ask for good ideas if you hide all the data.
Makes sense. So what are the other 2 pillars?
The third is open communication. That means bi-directional channels where people can raise a red flag without, getting their head bitten off.
Always nice to keep your head.
Always a plus. But the 4th pillar is where almost every company hits a brick wall. And that's true empowerment and delegation. That means genuinely transferring your authority to someone lower on the org chart.
Wow. And doing all 4 of those things actually moves the needle because, I imagine it's a lot of upfront work to run a team that way.
Oh, the bottom line impact is massive.
Yeah.
The meta-analytic data Westover compiled shows that when employees experience this kind of, meaningful participation, their engagement scores jump by 23 to 31% compared to those in autocratic environments.
31%, that's a huge jump.
It's massive. And you also see a 34% drop in turnover.
Wow.
Right. In a tight labor market, retaining a third of your flight risk talent just by changing how you make decisions, that's a huge competitive advantage. Plus, burnout rates drop by about a 1/5.
But letting go of the steering wheel seems to be the hardest part of this entire equation for managers. Like, there is a study Westover highlights looking at Lebanese organizations that I thought was just such a perfect microcosm of human nature. These are, traditionally hierarchical corporate cultures that are attempting to modernize.
Well, the Lebanese study is fascinating because it reveals the exact friction point here. Employees in those organizations reported that their leaders were actually getting quite good at the first 3 pillars.
Okay.
The open communication was there. They were talking more, having more town halls. But when it came to that 4th pillar, the delegation part, the leaders completely froze.
They just couldn't do it.
No, they couldn't.
Okay.
They wanted the benefits of a vocal workforce,
Yeah.
but they absolutely refused to give up their final veto power.
So it's basically like a parent telling their teenager, I want you to be fully involved in planning our family vacation. Pitch me your best ideas. But the parent still holds the credit card, they still pick the final destination, and they still set the itinerary.
That is a perfect analogy.
It just feels like performative voice. Like the company puts out a suggestion box, pretends to listen, and then just does whatever the CEO wanted to do anyway.
And the problem is that performative voice breeds deep cynicism. Employees are incredibly perceptive. If they realize their input is just being dropped into a black hole to make leadership feel progressive, they will shut down completely.
Yeah, I'd stop giving ideas too.
Right. And executives can no longer afford to run companies this way because of the rise of what researchers call wicked problems.
Wicked problems. Okay, I've heard that term used in public policy, but how does it apply to a business trying to sell software or like manufacture goods?
So a wicked problem is an issue with moving targets, contradictory requirements, and basically no single right answer. Think about pivoting a supply chain during a global pandemic,
Oh, yeah. Nightmare.
or integrating artificial intelligence into a legacy product. The complexity is so high that no single executive, no matter how brilliant they are, has the technical knowledge to solve it alone.
Because the answers are scattered across all the specialized frontline workers?
Exactly. Combine that complexity with younger generations who demand autonomy as a baseline condition of employment, and the illusion of the omniscient boss just shatters entirely.
Which sets up the biggest mystery in this research, I think. Let's say a company realizes they are facing these wicked problems. They genuinely try to be participative, they open the books, they try to delegate authority, they build all the right structures, and yet they still fail to innovate. They ask for ideas, and the room goes dead silent.
The dreaded silent room.
Right. Why does the suggestion box stay empty even when management is sincerely begging for input?
That silence leads us to the core mechanism Westover focuses on, which is psychological safety. The researchers Amy Edmondson and Z. Clay define psychological safety as the shared belief that interpersonal risk-taking is welcomed and will not be punished. In the paper, psychological safety is described as a mediating factor.
Okay, let's break down that term because mediation in statistics usually means something very specific about how two things connect.
Sure. So think of participative structures, like the town halls or delegation frameworks, as the engine of a car. Creativity is the wheels, and psychological safety is the transmission.
Ah,
You can rev the engine of participative leadership all you want, but if the transmission of psychological safety is missing, the power never reaches the wheels. The car goes nowhere.
right. So without safety, all the structures you built are completely useless because employees will simply self-censor.
Exactly. They do the mental math. They sit there and think, okay, the boss just asked for feedback on their new strategic plan. The plan is terribly flawed, but if I point that out, will I look like not a team player? Will I miss out on my bonus?
So they just nod and protect their career.
Yep. To fix that transmission, leaders have to fundamentally change how they frame the work itself. They have to stop framing business challenges as execution problems, where there's a known path and any deviation is a failure,
Yeah.
and start framing them as learning problems.
Learning problem.
Right, because learning problems naturally require experimentation. They require trial and error, which normalizes intelligent failures as just a required part of the job.
See, I want to push back on this a little bit because when people hear psychological safety, it often gets misinterpreted as creating some kind of corporate utopia where everyone is endlessly nice, we hand out participation trophies, and nobody is ever allowed to critique an idea for fear of hurting someone's feelings.
What's fascinating here is that true psychological safety operates in the exact opposite way. It is absolutely not about being coddled. Westover uses the investment management firm Bridgewater Associates as a prime example of this.
Okay, Bridgewater.
Bridgewater has institutionalized a culture of radical transparency. There is intense psychological safety for expressing your ideas. Like, an entry-level analyst is completely safe to stand up in a meeting and tell the billionaire CEO, Ray Dalio, that his macroeconomic theory is totally wrong.
Wow. But they can't just throw out a contrarian opinion and expect a round of applause, right?
Oh, far from it. While you have total safety to speak up, there is zero safety for your ego.
Zero safety for your ego.
Right. If you challenge the CEO, your own reasoning will be immediately subjected to the most severe, unfiltered public scrutiny imaginable. You will be ruthlessly stress-tested. So the culture provides the safety to be radically honest, not the safety to be comfortable.
Okay, so if we establish that participation requires both structural power sharing and the psychological safety to engage in rigorous, honest debate, How do we actually do that without the company descending into total chaos? Let's dive into the practical blueprints Westover lays out.
Yet the playbook for doing this successfully relies on incredibly sturdy frameworks. You could look at a company like Buffer, for example.
The software company.
Exactly. Their approach to the information sharing pillar is absolute radical transparency. They publicly share internal strategic documents, their financial data, and incredibly, the exact salaries of every single employee.
Which would give the average Fortune 500 executive an absolute panic attack.
No,
Without a doubt. I mean, the immediate fear is that if everyone knows the financials, everyone is going to demand a raise, or they'll suggest wildly expensive projects.
But the reality is exactly the reverse. When you treat employees like adults and show them the actual organizational economics, the razor-thin margins, the cash flow constraints, they calibrate their behavior.
Right.
Their suggestions become highly realistic because they are doing the exact same math the CEO is doing. And when an employee pitches an idea that leadership has to turn down, the employee is far more understanding. Because the financial constraint isn't some mysterious excuse cooked up by management, it's a verified number on a shared spreadsheet.
That makes perfect sense for objective things like budgets. I mean, math is math. But what about when a company deals in subjective creativity? It brings to mind the Pixar example from the research.
Yes, Pixar is the gold standard for navigating subjective creativity through their brain trust model.
The brain trust.
Right. When a director is working on a film, they don't develop it in a silo. They regularly present their messy, unfinished storyboards to a room of fellow directors and writers who provide brutally honest, unfiltered feedback.
But how does that not just evolve into bruised egos and defensive arguments? I mean, creative people can be a bit sensitive.
Well, two rules create the psychological safety. First, the critique must always focus on the project, never the person. You don't say, you are bad at writing dialogue. You say, this character's motivation in scene 3 isn't clear.
Okay, that makes sense. Focus on the work.
And second, and most importantly, the director presenting the film retains absolute creative authority. The brain trust cannot mandate a change. They offer the critique, but the director decides whether to implement it. You don't have to take the advice, but you have to hear it.
Which ties into another incredible concept from the Patagonia example. Employees at Patagonia are encouraged to participate in environmental committees and pitch sustainability initiatives. And naturally, not every idea can be funded. But when leadership rejects an idea, they don't just send a generic thanks but no thanks email. They sit down and provide a detailed, transparent explanation of the trade-offs they considered.
And that is the principle of procedural justice. Human beings are remarkably resilient when dealing with disappointment, provided they believe the process that led to the disappointment was fair.
Right.
You don't need to win every argument. You just need to know that your voice was genuinely heard, evaluated on its merits, and treated with respect.
Winning the argument versus fair process. I love that distinction. Now, the research takes this to the absolute extreme with a company called Morningstar.
Oh, yes.
They process a massive percentage of the tomatoes consumed in the United States, and they do it with zero formal hierarchy. There are literally no bosses.
It sounds like a recipe for unmitigated disaster, doesn't it?
It sounds like Lord of the Flies in the break room. I mean, if two employees disagree on how to calibrate a machine, who breaks a tie, how does anything ever get decided if no one is in charge?
If we connect this to the bigger picture of organizational design, Morningstar functions beautifully, precisely because they replace implicit, assumed hierarchy with explicit, negotiated agreements.
Oh, does that work?
They use a tool called colleague letters of understanding. Every year, an employee sits down with the peers they interact with the most, and they formally negotiate their responsibilities, their metrics, and their decision-making authority.
Okay, let's make this concrete. Say we are on a team at a company using these participative frameworks, and we need to buy a new $50,000 project management software. In a normal company, the IT director just signs the check and tells us to use it.
Right.
How does a participative team do it without spending 6 months in committee meetings?
They rely on rigorous real clarity frameworks, like the RCI matrix mentioned in the research. RCI stands for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. Before we even start looking at software, we map the decision.
Okay, so maybe I am the R responsible. I'm the one who actually has to research the software, do the demos, and write the proposal.
Yes, and I might be the A accountable. I don't do the research, but I own the final yes or no veto because it hits my budget. Then we have our software engineers, who are C consulted. We must gather their input for deciding because they have to integrate it. And finally, the sales team is I informed. We just send them an email when the decision is made.
So we aren't voting. We are just hyper clear on who holds what kind of power. Westover also mentions a 1 to 7 delegation scale to clarify this further, right?
Yeah, the delegation scale prevents paralytic consensus seeking. Level 1 is the most autocratic I decide and tell you. Level 4 is a joint consensus where we have equal votes. But level 7 is total empowerment. I delegate the entire choice to you, and I don't even need to know what you picked.
Wow, level 7 is ultimate trust.
Exactly. Participative leadership isn't about making everything a level 4 democracy. It's about explicitly naming which level we are using for which decision, so no one is confused about their autonomy.
This brings up a massive structural challenge, though. You can have an enlightened founder who implements RSCI matrices and brain trusts, but founders retire. Companies scale from 50 people in a garage to 5,000 across 3 continents.
Yeah.
How do you prevent the company from sliding backward into a rigid hierarchy when it grows?
Well, you have to rewire the organizational DNA. The culture cannot rely on the charisma of the CEO. It must be embedded directly into the operating systems. Look at W.L. Gore, the material science company behind Gore-Tex. They use a lattice organization structure.
Meaning there is no traditional corporate ladder to climb.
Exactly. There are no static management positions. Leadership at Gore is based entirely on followership.
Followership.
Yeah. If you have an idea for a new product, you don't pitch it to a boss for budget approval. You pitch it to your peers. If you can convince enough colleagues to voluntarily join your project team, you become the leader of that project.
That's wild. So you have to actually inspire people to work with you.
Right. Your authority is derived strictly from your ability to inspire and influence, not from a title. Furthermore, compensation isn't decided by a manager, it's determined by peer ranking committees. Because they hard-coded participation into how people get paid and how projects get staffed, they've sustained their innovation for over 60 years.
Hard-coding the culture is so clever. Shopify has a concept mentioned in the paper that achieves something similar on an interpersonal level. They use a metaphor called trust batteries.
Oh, I love the trust battery. It's a beautifully simple tool to make the invisible dynamics of psychological safety visible. At Shopify, they explicitly teach employees that when you start a new working relationship, your trust battery with that person is at 50%. It's exactly halfway charged.
So you aren't starting with blind trust, but you aren't starting with suspicion either.
Precisely. And from that day forward, every interaction either charges the battery through reliable, trustworthy behavior or depletes it through missed deadlines or office politics. The genius of this is that it gives employees a shared, neutral vocabulary. You can walk into a room and say to a colleague, "Hey, my trust battery with you is running a bit low right now because of how that last project ended. Let's talk about it." It prevents resentment from just festering in the dark.
You're measuring the relationship, which leads directly to what Microsoft did under Satya Nadella. They realized that if psychological safety is the engine of innovation, you can't just rely on gut feelings or like annual employee surveys to gauge if it's working. You have to treat culture like an engineering problem.
Yeah, Microsoft recognized the danger of lagging indicators. If you wait a year to see if your new participative strategy increased revenue, it's too late to course correct.
Right.
You have to measure leading indicators.
But how do you measure something as invisible as trust? I mean, they can't hook employees up to heart monitors. How do you quantify safety the way you quantify server uptime?
You look at the behavioral exhaust that safety creates.
Behavioral exhaust. Okay.
Yeah. For example, they track voice frequency. In a given meeting, are the same two executives talking for 90% of the time, or is the airtime distributed across the junior engineers as well?
Oh, that's smart.
They look at decision cycle times. Does delegating authority actually accelerate how fast a product ships, or is the team bogged down in endless consultation? Microsoft even used A/B testing on their own culture, rolling out different communication frameworks to different teams and measuring which ones genuinely moved the needle on engagement.
The software company Atlassian takes a slightly different approach to the same problem. They run what they call health monitor workshops. But the key detail is that they don't hire expensive external consultants to fly in, diagnose the team, and hand down a report.
No, Atlassian distributes the toolkit directly to the front line. They teach their own employees how to facilitate these complex, vulnerable conversations. They train them in design thinking and conflict resolution.
They are essentially turning their own software engineers into organizational psychologists.
Which is the ultimate evolution of participative leadership. You aren't just handing employees the steering wheel. You are teaching them how the engine works, how to fix it when it breaks down, and trusting them to navigate.
So bringing all of this together for you, the listener, if you are looking around your organization and wondering why the innovation has stalled out, Westover's research makes it clear that the solution is a two-part harmony. On one side, you have the structural reality. You absolutely must distribute power.
Yes,
You
answer.
need the clear decision rights, the RSCI matrices, the transparent financials, and the 1-to-7 delegation scales.
But structure alone is a ghost town. On the other side, you need the cultural catalyst of psychological safety. You need the failure tolerance, the fair process, the trust batteries, and the willingness to subject your own ideas to rigorous, ego-free stress testing.
Right.
When you fuse the architecture of shared power with the psychological freedom to use it, that is when the latent creativity of those 7 disengaged employees finally unlocks.
It really is the only sustainable way to navigate the wicked problems of the modern economy. But before we sign off, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to chew on. Something that stretches everything we've just discussed about distributing authority to its logical extreme.
Oh, I like where this is going.
If true participative leadership means transferring genuine power to the front line, making all strategic information radically transparent, and giving teams the frameworks to negotiate their own roles and peer evaluate their own compensation, what happens to the traditional concept of the boss?
That is the big question.
If an organization achieves perfect psychological safety and flawless participative structures, is the ultimate goal of a modern leader to eventually make themselves completely obsolete?
It certainly redefines what leadership means. It transitions the role from being the chief decision maker to being the chief architect of the environment.
Something to think about the next time you look at your company's organizational chart. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.